Hey guys, welcome to Peach Garden, and today I'll be talking about a simple way to easily find the notes within major, minor, augmented, and diminished chords. I'll also be talking about a shortcut to doing the same thing even faster for those who are more familiar with chords at the end of the video, so do stay around. Traditionally, to find the notes in the chord, we need to be familiar with the scale of the chord. Let's use the C major chord as an example. Using the traditional method, to find the notes of the C major chord, we first need to know the notes in the C major scale as shown here. Each note in the C major scale has a number to it, C being the first note, D being the second, E being the third, and so on. The first, third, and fifth note of the C major scale, which are C, E, and G respectively, make up the three notes in the C major chord. The same applies for other chords. Let's take the G major chord as another example. To find the notes in a G major chord, we need to know the notes in the G major scale here. Similarly, to find the notes in the G major chord, we take the first, third, and fifth note of the G major scale, which happens to be G, B, and D, and there we have found the three notes in the G major chord. This way of finding the notes in a chord works, but might not be ideal if you're not that familiar with all the scales of every note. For instance, if you need to find the notes of, say, the D flat major chord, but you're not familiar with the D flat major scale, the traditional way of finding the notes might become pretty slow. As such, let's take a look at an alternative, less memory-intensive way of deriving the notes in chords. The first thing we need to know is the concept of semitones. A semitone is the smallest musical interval in Western tonal music. In other words, a semitone is the distance between two notes that are right next to each other on a piano. Take a look at the two notes in red here, C and C sharp. As C sharp is the closest note to C on C's right side, C sharp is one semitone higher than C. Conversely, C is one semitone lower than C sharp. Here, the green arrows represent the semitones between the notes highlighted in red. D is two semitones higher than C as shown by the two green arrows. D sharp is three semitones higher than C as shown by the three green arrows. And E is four semitones higher than C. Now that we have a better understanding of what a semitone is and how it functions, let's move on to how we can quickly find the notes in all the four chords here: major chords, minor chords, augmented chords, and diminished chords. Major and minor chords are used very often in many songs, while augmented and diminished chords are used much less, but are normally added to make songs sound more special. Let's first take a look at finding the notes in major chords. Each major chord has three notes, the first note being the note in the chord's name. The C major chord starts with a C, the A major chord starts with an A, and the D flat major chord starts with a D flat, and so on. Let's take a look at the C major chord as an example here, the first note being C. The second note is four semitones higher than the first note. From the note C, we move 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones up and arrive at the note E. E is thus the second note in the C major chord. The third note is in turn 3 semitones higher than the second note. We thus move 1, 2, 3 semitones up, and we land on G, which is the third note of the C major chord. As such, the C major chord consists of the three notes C, E, and G. The second note E being 4 semitones higher than the first note, and the third note G being 3 semitones above the second note. This method works for all major chords, regardless of whichever note the major chord starts in. Let's take the A flat major chord as another example. As usual, the first note is A flat. The second note is 4 semitones above the first note, and we can deduce that the second note is C. The third note is 3 semitones above the second note, and we can thus deduce it as E flat. And there, the three notes in the A flat major chord are A flat, C, and E flat. Next, let's take a look at finding the notes in minor chords. The steps are very similar in that of finding notes in major chords, but the number of semitones vary slightly. For minor chords, similarly, there are three notes, the first note being the note in the chord's name. However, for minor chords, the second note is 3 semitones higher than the first note, while the third note is 4 semitones higher than the second note, a slight difference from major chords. Let's take a look at the A minor chord as an example. The first note is an A, the second note is 3 semitones above the first note, so we get C, and the third note is 4 semitones higher than the second note, and we arrive at E. As such, the three notes in the A minor chord are A, C, and E. Let's take a look at another example, the C minor chord, whose first note is a C. As this is a minor chord, the second note is 3 semitones higher than the first note, and hence we land at E flat. The third note is in turn 4 semitones higher than the second note, and after moving up 4 semitones from E flat, we land on G. As such, the C minor chord consists of C, E flat, and G. Next, let's take a look at augmented chords. Similarly, the steps to finding the notes in augmented chords are the same, and the difference lies only in the number of semitones. For augmented chords, the second note is 4 semitones higher than the first note, and the third note is also 4 semitones higher than the second note. Let's use the C augmented chord as an example. As usual, the first note in the C augmented chord is naturally a C. The second note is 4 semitones higher than the first note, and here we land on the second note E. The third note is 4 semitones higher than the second note, and here we land on G sharp. And thus we have the C augmented chord consisting of C, E, and G sharp. The last type of chord we'll go through today will be the diminished chords. For diminished chords, the second note is 3 semitones higher than the first note, and the third note is 3 semitones higher than the second note. Let's use the C diminished chord, which starts on C, as an example. The second note is 3 semitones above the first note, and after going up 3 semitones, we land on E flat. The third note is also 3 semitones higher than the second note, and thus we land on F sharp. The C diminished chord thus contains C, E flat, and F sharp. To recap, we can find the notes of any major, minor, augmented, or diminished chords starting from any of the 12 possible notes, if we find the second and third notes of the chords based on the number of semitones from the previous note. For major chords, from the starting note, we move up by 4 semitones, then by 3 semitones. For minor chords, we move up 3 semitones, then 4. For augmented chords, we move up 4 semitones, then another 4 semitones. And for diminished chords, we move up 3 semitones, followed by another 3 semitones. As you get more familiar with various chords, another additional shortcut to finding the notes inside chords would be to derive them from other chords. Here's a quick overview of deriving chords from other chords, and this method can be even faster than the previous method, given you are already familiar with some chords. Let's start with transforming a major to a minor chord. To get a minor chord from a major chord, we simply need to lower the middle note by 1 semitone. Let's take a look at an example. For instance, here's a C major chord. To get a C minor chord, we simply take the middle note, which is E, and lower it by 1 semitone, like this, and there, now we have a C minor chord. This method goes both ways too. To get a major chord from an existing minor chord, we simply need to raise the middle note by 1 semitone. And once again, we have a C major chord. This works for all major and minor chords, so if you are already familiar with a major chord and wish to find its minor equivalent or vice versa, you simply need to do this rather than having to go through the process of counting semitones from the first note. Now let's move on to deriving an augmented chord from a major chord. To do this, we simply need to raise the last note of the chord by 1 semitone. For instance, here is a C major chord. To make it a C augmented chord, we take the last note of C major, which is G, and raise it by 1 semitone to a G sharp. And there, we now have a C augmented chord. Similar to the previous example, this goes both ways. To go back to the C major chord, we just need to lower the last note of the augmented chord, G sharp, by 1 semitone. And there, we have the C major chord again. Let's move on to deriving diminished chords from minor chords and vice versa, where we lower the last note of the chord by 1 semitone. Here is a C minor chord, and to convert it into a C diminished chord, we simply need to take the last note of the chord, G, and lower it by 1 semitone, landing on a G flat. And there we have a C diminished chord. With that, thanks for watching, and I hope you have learned something new today, and do leave a like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. Also, Pitch Garden is a year training platform with multiple progressive exercises to help you practice identifying notes, sequences of notes, chords, and so on. Do check out Pitch Garden if you haven't already, and hope to see you there.